Hey folks, welcome to Bear Mountain. This week what we want to do is kind of circle back and talk about how we're going to water and fertilize our soil blocks. You might remember when we did our video when we were seeding our onions and we made soil blocks for off of the stand-up 1-inch blocker. We talked about, okay, once things had germinated, we were going to begin to do some fertilization. These we have 4 or 5 trays of these great onions that just got started. They're a little spindly right now, and I think that's probably part of the problem has been that just getting them enough air circulation and getting them going. Onions always kind of start out for us, they're looking kind of loosey-goosey, but it's now, these guys have been germinated for at least a good week and a half, and we have watered it normally, and normally meaning from the bottom, but we haven't applied any fertilizer. So what I wanted to talk about was 2 things today, was how we apply the fertilizer and how we do the watering. Now, we might have remembered when we started the seedlings, we put the soil blocks in a weave bottom tray, and
Can you show us one of those, please?
Yes, ma'am. We have weave bottom trays everywhere, except right where they're supposed to be, right?
Yeah.
Okay, this is what we mean by a weave bottom tray, where we have a definite diagonals creating a crosshatch type situation, and we're left with probably, not quite a 1/2 inch, but somewhere around maybe 3/8 of an inch holes. This allows, when you put the soil blocks in, the bottom of the soil blocks will have air to breathe, so we can use root pruning, technique with the air, as well as when we water, we can set this in a solid tray, which is what we have here. And if we have water in this solid tray, then we set the soil block tray inside of it. We end up leaving it there for a few minutes until the blocks get nice and moist, and then we can just lift it out. So that way we're not, sitting around fooling around going, oh, okay, well, we got to drain the water out, or we leave it in there too long. Things can dissolve either way, but usually it's a really simple system. It takes only a minute or 2 before you'll notice that the top of the blocks are moistened up.
They work together.
Yeah, they work together.
The blocks to absorb the water.
Right. And they'll because there is a bit of airspace in between the blocks, but there's enough capillary action that even if you're not filling it and you're not submerging the blocks, you're maybe having enough water that gets up to maybe half of the height of the block, but the water will be pulled up by the capillary action.
Actually, it doesn't even take that much. It's just the bottom needs to be touching the water, and away it goes.
Yep. And it works. This idea works exactly the same for when you're watering mini blocks that
are the 3/4.
Because we have done, you can put up to 300 individual 3/4 inch blocks in one of these 10-inch by 20 trays, which is quite a bit. But this would also serve to be how we would water those too. It's the exact same technique. So the watering system is pretty simple, and what we use just to stabilize things, to give, you can see the bottom of my tray here. You may even see a worm. I don't want to tip it too far because I don't want to dump it out. But maybe if I lift it up. Okay. So what we have done here is we keep these guys in one of these solid trays, and that gives almost a 1/4 inch, maybe not quite, maybe more like about between 1/8 and a 1/4 inch of air space here because of this weave bottom. Since our tighter weave bottom where the blocks are will sit right inside of this tray, it gives it enough airspace to basically prune it underneath. So you can, though, if you end up sitting this on a solid tray, you may not get all the airflow you need, but if this is sitting on like a wire rack, it actually works out pretty well.
Right.
That's essentially it for the watering and how we store the guys, and how we, maneuver these guys around is basically in these 10-20 trays just like this, and it's a pretty solid way to do it. Okay, today we're going to fertilize and water at the same time. So the question is, what kind of fertilizer to use? Now, what we're trying to do is, the purpose of our experiments that we've been running for the last years is moving to Jadam and using their techniques. And one of the techniques is their anaerobic digestate that they call Jadam liquid fertilizer. And we have made some, we've been making it now for little over 2 years. And we have some in our, down in our crate house.
Isn't this what we call stinky buckets?
Yeah, that would be referencing Stinky Buckets, the fertilizer factory. But basically what we've been doing is we've been using that fertilizer, and we've made mostly grass-based or the light green growing materials from comfrey or things of that nature is what we've been using in our liquid fertilizer. And today what we've got is we've got our oldest fertilizer is the grass, and this stuff is, I'm opening this up, and Denise usually has a 1 part per 10 billion sensitivity to any odor. So
I don't smell anything.
You don't smell anything
right now.
I'm
kind of plugged up, but
this is 2-year-old Jadam liquid fertilizer, and it's doesn't really have any solids in it that you would say is chunky or anything like that. So let me pour a little bit out in a clear glass, and you guys can kind of see what it looks like. I'm gonna pour it over here in case I.
Well, that's really hard to see. But really dark.
So, if you look at it, this is grass-based, and it's got a little bit of a green tint to it. And this material is now 2 years old.
I don't smell anything.
And there's no real odor to it at all anymore. Now, when we first made it, I think if you go back and look at our Stinky Bucket videos, you'll note that Denise nearly passed out when I opened up the barrel.
Not that bad, but it's pretty.
It was pretty bad. But all that is basically digested or vented off over time. And what's left is a really nice mineral and basically, the things that would off gas would be some form of the nitrogen in terms of amines or ammonia, but basically sulfurs and things like that off gassed. And what's left are the other minerals, the magnesiums, the phosphorus, the potassium, the micronutrients that were in the spring growing grass. And that's what this was made from, is this grass had been vigorously growing in March and April, grabbing all those nutrients from the ground and putting it forward into their leaves. And this is really pretty good stuff. So this is our oldest, and it has absolutely no odor at all. And then we have another that is a mixture of ones we made last summer. We made out of comfrey and thistle. And it does have a bit of an odor because it's just not as old. And it looks kind of the same. Let me just get another glass here. I'll pour a little bit of this in a clear glass. And it may have a little more solid suspended in it. Yeah, I guess, yeah, didn't do a very good job there. Now this one definitely does have an odor, but it's not so obnoxious, and it disappears pretty fast. Now you can see that actually the color of that one's a little different. It's a little more
lighter.
It's a little lighter. It's not as rich because it's not quite as old.
It's not done.
And there was still quite a bit of solids left in the bucket, so there was more to go on it. So what we're going to be using kind of a mixture of both. And
Why would you mix them?
Just to get a diversity.
Okay.
Okay, because the comfrey has maybe a little more things that are micronutrient oriented than maybe the grass-based did, and it's not so much that we're adding nitrogen to these guys, is we're adding the other nutrients to help the plant grow. And the microbiology that's in the compost and things of that nature, there's probably enough nitrogen in these blocks to get the plants started. And what we found, at least I found last year when I was using this material, is I ended up with a really pretty healthy transplants. Now, this is all free, right? This is stuff that just grows on your property.
Right.
The only thing you invest in it is time and a place to let it do its thing. And we've done videos on how to make that. Now, what we're gonna do is be using this stuff. These 2 coffee cans will probably last me a good month or 2 in terms of fertilizing, especially as we get more and more transplants going. We'll be using, a bit more. We'll fertilize with this on a 1 to 200 part basis. So what does that mean? It means if you were using a liter, you would use basically 5 mil or a teaspoon. Hate to cross over between English and metric, but you could probably use a teaspoon and a half in a quart of water, and that would be fine too. That'd be pretty close. We're not really want to go super hot, so
more is not good.
More is not necessarily going to give you a lot of benefit, because you got to remember what this isn't necessarily that you're trying to give this thing, this big nitrogen boost, like a Miracle-Gro shot. What this really is this is a lot of nutrients that the plant, can only take up, as the biology in the block works with the roots around the plant, so much at a time. So you'd only use it once a week. And that's kind of, even if I'm watering, say when it gets warmer, I may be watering twice a week, or as the plants really get rocking and rolling, if they need a little more water, it could even be 3 times a week, depending on how the temperatures are.
That in each time you water?
No, you'd only do it one time. So pick your day, Fertilizer Friday, whatever you want to call it. Whatever you want to call it, go with that, and fertilize your plants at that point. Or if you're organizing them in your greenhouse, maybe certain veg type products get done on a certain day and certain flowers on another day. So you just got to get a system to figure it out.
Does it have to be stored somewhere special?
That's a good question. I store this stuff outside, basically. I just put it on my rack out here. And,
does it need to be refrigerated or anything like that?
It's essentially an inert substance. It's not going to be attractive to animals. Cats, on the other hand, they just love to get into things. No, I know why you went up there, because it's up there high. But we basically, sorry.
What was that, a sneeze?
Yeah, I guess it was. But basically, no, if you find a cool place, don't store it where, it's necessarily hot. But even if it got hot, it's not going to hurt it, okay? Particularly the older it is, it's biologically not really doing much anymore. There is still some anaerobic, possibilities that if stuff like this, that it hasn't totally aged out, could ferment a little longer, but it's mostly likely it's more of an aging process than anything else. Okay, and once it gets to the point like this grass stuff is, it's not gonna change much. And you want to keep it covered because you don't want stuff getting into it, like leaves or bugs or whatever. And so you do want to keep it in a covered container. And if it's airtight, that's fine. Doesn't matter, because it's not a live biologic system that you're going for here. This is just a nutrient solution. And again, it's free.
That's the main reason why we do what we do.
Well, actually, what we've been trying to do is we've been trying to work through, and this is where the JDAM system works for us. We've been trying to work through a system that we can use here with what we have here on the farm, and not purchase as little as we need to. instead of, you know, everything from fertilization to seeds to etc., all the stuff needing to be purchased. Like, you know, when we made the soil blocks, the only purchased real parts of it were the perlite, the vermiculite, and the peat. And you go, well, that's a lot, you know, but we did add significant amounts of our own compost to it too, which helped improve it. So in essence, we made a potting soil.
Right.
Kind of the idea. Okay, so how do we mix this up? If you have a container that has any kind of good measurings on it, like this is an old 1 quart canning jar, and it's got markings for 1 liter, 1.5 liters. And what I do is I'll make up and say, well, in order to do a 1 to 200, I just need to have about 7.5 mils. When what I do is I use these are like ink filling syringes used for inkjet cartridges, but they're nice because they're in milliliters. But if you had anything that measured in milliliters, that would work too. So what I can do is, I'm going to cheat here a little bit, is I'm going to pull in, say it's 7.5, I'm going to pull in about 4 of the younger stuff, so to speak. And then I'm going to pull in 3.5 of my older. Okay, right there. And that's it. And then fill this thing up to 1500. And then what we're going to do is put this in our solid tray, which I've got to change this out. So the next step here is I just fill it up. And this is the exciting part, where I put water in a jar. Again, no one on YouTube has done this before. That's about right. Yep, 1500 right there. Okay. A semi-level surface is always helpful. But that isn't really much to the water at all. And you'll notice, even if you have JLF that has an odor, when you're diluting down that low, you're not going to notice really anything at all. But the plants do. The plants, actually I don't need this bottom tray in it. We'll set this aside here. And then I just set it in the water. And I just wait for the top of the blocks to glisten up. And they should here very, very shortly. Usually only takes a minute or two. And once you see that glisten, then you know it's done. Yeah, I'm already seeing it. That looks pretty good. That means the material has been absorbed into the blocks. So I just pull it out and just let it drain for a second or two till I stop hearing it dripping back into the pan. And then this one's done. So if you really wanted to kind of, expedite the situation, obviously mix up a bigger batch, have more trays lined out to water in, and where you can just continually just keep pumping them back and forth and back and forth. It really goes pretty fast. And you get very little disintegration of the blocks. I know a lot of people think, well, if you do that, won't the blocks just melt? Well, no, because what's going on is these roots of these plants are actually working in that block and they're tightening it up. So even the longer these guys go on before transplant, the roots will be really solidly holding the block together. So it becomes less and less of an issue of the thing disintegrating on you. But honestly, if you got a phone call and you walked away and you left it sitting in here, you might have a problem.
It's always less than a minute.
Yeah, it's got to be pretty fast.
I mean, even when the blocks that are not seeded but have been pre-made and they've completely dried out in the greenhouse, you can do this same technique to rehydrate the blocks. And what you're looking for is that, you can tell a very light brown mini block looks totally different than a regular one that is moistened. And it takes maybe 2 minutes for them to just start to glisten, and there you go, you're back in business.
And actually, in our past, when we were doing this for flowers, we'd many times say, well, how many mini block trays are we going to need for the week? Even though you may not seed them all in, one day, you'd be looking at it and say, well, I need 15 trays, 15 of these 10, 20 trays. Well, it's more efficient to mix up a batch enough and just stamp these guys out. And maybe, by the time you get to seeding the last 2 trays, there's no longer enough moisture in it, and so you just do exactly what you said you do. You just rehydrate them up before you seed, so there's enough moisture in it.
So from the bottom, let them work together to rehydrate. Do not, hose them down from the top. Nope. Because all that does is break them up.
Slow is important.
Yeah, they're not hydrated clear through.
Right. So this now they're well hydrated. They've been given a little bit of inoculant, like I said, from the JLF, and they're ready to kind of continue their growing on process. And
so how do you think they look at this point?
Well, onions for us, they always come up and they look really great when they're starting up, and then they kind of, the first growth is always kind of leggy, and so it looks like,
kind of floppy.
But once they start to put, this is like their first leaf from germination. So once they kind of, get a little stronger and they start putting up their second, then pretty soon, within a week or two, it's going to be a lot better. But they always look kind of leggy when they first start out. And I think, somewhat it has to do with the time of the year. We're using natural light out here, so we're not putting any kind of artificial light on top of them. And we've had some clear days and some cloudy days, so they've kind of had a mix of things going on. But I think these guys will be fine. Based on what happened last year, they came out great.
What do you think of the germination rate?
I was pleased with Bridger, and not with Cabernet. Cabernet was
red?
Yeah, the red was very spotty, and I was kind of I put 3 or 4 seeds in a block, and in some blocks I didn't have any germination at all. And it was slower than the other guys. Most of these guys started germinating in about 5 days.
5 days.
5 to 7 days they were up.
What about the other new ones?
They did really well.
Yankee?
Yeah, the Yankee did really well, and the Patterson
We've
performed.
had Patterson and Bridger,
Yep.
and that's why we continued, but we're trying new others that are new, and we wanted a red, and that sounds disappointing to me.
Yeah, maybe we got to find another one.
Yeah.
So, any other thoughts before we wrap her up?
No, I think, this is what we're going to do, fertilizing everything.
Yeah, even larger plants, once they're established in the garden, if we need to do fertilization, we'll be using this material on them, comfrey based or grass based. When I say grass based, if you guys have read the Jadam book, he'll say grass fertilizer. It's not just grass. Okay, you guys can use vigorously growing green parts of weeds because they hold a lot of minerals too. So basically what you want to avoid any plant that's moved on to senescence or seeding. You don't want to take anything that's got a high carbon content in it, because what that means is a lot of the nutrients have become locked up into other components that don't readily digest very well. Okay, so what you're looking for is the green components, the quickly growing parts of the plant.
Didn't we say like the tomato tips?
Tomato tips, like when you're training tomato plants.
Yeah, the in between the arms.
Yeah, the leaf nodes.
That's what I'm trying to think of.
Yep. Yeah, you want to you use things
because those are all on the growing.
Right, where the plants are growing is where all the activity is going on. Okay, the older senescing leaves, they're not as much value. So what you're really trying to get to is when you're making this stuff is spring is the best time to make your fertilizer. So go back and check out the videos on how we made the fertilizer in the past. And since spring is coming up, we're in February now. The chances are as soon as you all get out from underneath ice and snow, things will start growing again. So that's the time to be thinking this year harvesting for next year's fertilizer.
Right.
Okay, well,
I can't think of anything more.
all right. Okay, everybody, just stay safe out there. And as always, we'll catch you on the next video. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.